what's next? Well, one of the things that's next, may I modestly propose, is that we need to rebuild the world. Most of our institutions, science, the old model of a corporation, the industrial model of government, education, the media that's collapsing, our systems for global cooperation. Did I mention the energy grid that's destroying the planet? We need to reindustrialize Earth. And this is not just a recession that we're going through, this is a punctuation point in human history where many of our institutions have come to the end of their life cycle and they can no longer take us forward. One of those, and I'm going to talk about that now, is education. If someone was frozen in Toronto about 100 years ago and they miraculously were thawed out today, and they looked around at the professions, a doctor in an operating theater, a pilot flying a jumbo jet, an engineer designing a modern building, they'd think, wow, has the world ever changed? And technology has been at the heart of the transformation of the professions. If they walked into a lecture theater at a local university or a typical classroom in Toronto, they'd look around and they'd breathe a sigh of relief. They'd say, well, this is something I recognize. The model of learning has remained unchanged, basically, for centuries. And it turns out that these institutions are very difficult to change. Well, there's a new force that's going to bring about change, and that force is people. Specifically, a new generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. Digital natives that have grown up bathed in bits. And these kids learn differently. I started studying children as a generation about, 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, my children are prodigies. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them. So that was a bad theory. So I started working with about 300 kids 15 years ago. And you may remember, it was a dozen years ago, I wrote this book called Growing Up Digital. Flash forward to today, these kids are not just growing up, they've grown up. They're into the high schools and into the universities now in unprecedented numbers. And they're coming into the workforce, into the marketplace, they're becoming teachers. And there's no more powerful force to change education than the students. And then a new generation, the first generation to come of age in the digital age. And the reason is that my generation, the baby boomers, their parents, spend 24 hours a week of watching television. And these kids watch a lot less TV, and they watch it differently. They come home, they turn on their computer, and they're in 3 different windows and talking to their friends and listening to an MP3 player, and they got 3 magazines open, and they got a video game going on this. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework, and the television is going on in the background, but the TV is sort of like ambient media. It's sort of like music. And when they're online, what are they doing? Well, rather than being the passive recipients of someone's video, they're reading, thinking, organizing, learning, collaborating, composing their thoughts, authenticating, researching, telling their stories. This is a generation that has different brains. They process information differently, they learn differently, and overall, this is for the better. Now let me get to my story. It was a year ago, and I was invited by the leadership of Florida State University, the president, the deans, and so on, to come and have a long lunch with about 20 of them. They were doing a strategic plan. They want to raise $1 billion, and they want to position themselves as the first 21st century university. So they asked me to come in and just talk to them, sort of pick my brain. So I gave them my story. I think the model of pedagogy is wrong. It's based on the lecture, a one-way model. It's a new generation of students who learn differently. We need to reinvent the university for the 21st century. And after I was finished, one of the deans turned to a youngster named Joe O'Shea. There's a picture of him here on the left. And they invited him to the meeting. Joe was 22 years old, and he's just graduating from Florida State. And the dean says to Joe, Joe, what do you think about what Don just said? And Joe says, well, this is resonating with me because I think we do learn differently. Let me give you an example. I don't read books. And the look around the room was kind of similar to the look in this room. People like, hello? And he explained. He says, I think I know what's in books, but I don't read books. I go online, and I'm really good at finding out information. If I need to know what's in a book per se, Google Books will give me any one chapter, and I'm good at figuring out what's the right chapter to understand someone's thesis. And if I have to read a physical book, and I rarely do, I don't read it like a book. I attack it like a website. I'm into the index. I'm twittering and chatting with people, and I'm looking at the table of contents and jumping around the book. I don't read books. The dean of the film school was sitting beside me, and he turns to the whole group and he says, well, I don't know if this is really important and exciting, or if this means the end of civilization. So we had this amazing conversation. Went on for about 3 hours. A whole number of fundamental tenets about education and learning were challenged. And at the end of the session, I said to Joe, where are you going? It turns out he was going back to Fort Lauderdale, which is where I was going, and I had a private plane for the day. So I said, hitch a ride with me. I want to get to know you. So we get in the plane, and I interviewed him. I said, tell me about yourself. What kind of student are you, Joe? And he says, I'm a good student. I said, how good? He says, well, I've always had A's, 4.0, grade out, perfect marks. I said, wow, congratulations. Do you do anything else? He says, well, I do the usual sports stuff. And he says, I'm also the president of the Students' Council here at Florida State. I'm on 18 committees. I have a $12 million budget. I chair 6 of the committees, so that's been taking a lot of time. I've been doing that for a couple of years. I said, wow, you still get 4.0, good for you. I said, anything else? He said, well, the really big thing is my girlfriend's from Katrina, or from New Orleans, and when Katrina hit, we went down there to see how we could help, and the devastated 9th Ward didn't have a healthcare clinic, so I set one up. I said, what do you mean you set up a clinic? He says, you can do anything you want with if you have the internet. You need an air conditioner, you can get someone to give you an air conditioner. I said, congratulations. How long did it last? He says, it's still functioning. Sees 9,000 patients per year. It's called the 9th Ward Healthcare Clinic. I said, wow, congratulations. I said, tell me about your family. He sighed. He said, well, it's a bit of a sensitive topic right now because both my parents passed away in the last year, different things. And I'm the eldest sibling, so it's tough. And my younger sibs live in other places. And I said, wow, so how do you communicate with them? He says, well, it's really my responsibility now to keep the family together. And the main way I've found of doing that is we've created a guild on World of Warcraft, and we go on missions together. He says, it's really helped us get over this devastating thing that's happened. I said, good for you, Joe, that's great. I said, what are you doing next year? He says, I'm going to London, England. I'm going to study, and I'm really excited because I'm going to get to experience the British healthcare system. He says, we never had healthcare. As we're from a poor family, we just never went to the doctor. He knows all about the British healthcare system. He knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He knows about Plato's philosophy of education. He's a deeply knowledgeable person, as knowledgeable, actually, as anybody I've met in the last couple of years. He doesn't read books. I said, so where are you going to university? He says, I'm doing a master's in philosophy at Oxford. Oxford and Cambridge would be the 2 hardest places to get into to do a master's, let alone a master's of philosophy. Any university in the world, probably. I said, wow, good for you, Joe. Have you got some kind of bursary or scholarship or something? He says, oh, yeah, it's great. I've got this fantastic scholarship. It just funds everything. I said, wonderful. Where did that come from? He says, it's called a Rhodes Scholarship. The only Rhodes Scholar from North Florida doesn't read books. You know, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. There's a new generation that learns differently, and we're locked into institutions of learning and models that go back centuries, arguably millennia. You see, the current model is based on the lecture. You got to do that. If you try hard as a teacher in public school or high school to engage students, but when you got a class size of 30, 35 kids. It's tough to do that. You're in the broadcast mode a lot of the time. And in the universities, the lecture is the foundation of pedagogy. It goes like this. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student. You're an empty vessel. You don't have knowledge. Get ready. Here it comes. I'm a transmitter of data, you see, and your goal is to take it into short-term active working memory and through practice and repetition to build deeper cognitive structures so you can recall it to me when I test you. Drill and kill. Sage on the stage. I heard a definition of the lecture. It's the process whereby the notes of a lecturer go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony of the fact that I'm standing up here giving you a lecture. But you're not going to remember much about what I said. You'll remember about Joe O'Shea, and you'll think that something's wrong with learning. This is actually not a good way of learning. So this lecture model is a broadcast model. You know what? It's totally inappropriate for a knowledge economy. Because when you graduate, it's not just what you know that counts, your ability to perform well on tests and so on. I mean, it used to be you graduated, when I did, and you kept up in your chosen field. You were set for life. Today you graduate and you're set for, I don't know, 15 minutes. And if you took a technical course in the first year, half of what you take in the fourth year is obsolete by the time you get to the fourth year. It's not just what you know, it's your capacity to learn lifelong. It's your capacity to think and solve problems and communicate and collaborate, put things in context, understand the interrelationship between things, which, as an aside, by the way, is one of the reasons that a liberal arts undergraduate education may be a great way to equip yourself for lifelong learning. So we have a model that's based on the lecture, and it's totally inappropriate. Do you know, I don't have hard data to support this, but anecdotally, I think the smartest university students in this country and in the United States don't go to lectures. The biggest thing is to get an A without having ever gone to a lecture. When an entire generation is boycotting the model of pedagogy, we have a problem. What's wrong with this model? It's one way, it's one size fits all, it's teacher focused, and the student is isolated in the learning process. And when students try and collaborate, as a number of them did at Ryerson, we call them cheaters. Well, maybe the way that was set up was wrong, saying to students that they can't collaborate, because when you get out into the workforce, work and learning and collaboration are all the same activity. What are you doing today? Are you working or are you learning? Or are you collaborating? They're all the same activity, actually. It's called knowledge work. So we need a new model that's student-focused, multi-way, customized, and where the students can collaborate and learn together and collectively as they continue out into the workforce to be able to work and learn and collaborate together. So some universities, some schools are starting to get it. Virginia Tech went in this thing called the Math Emporium. There are no more math lectures. Students learn interactively in this beautiful room with these interactive computer-based programs, and the math prof is there to structure a customized learning experience. Then they collaborate together in small groups. In 1977, I did a master's degree in education at the University of Alberta, and I took a graduate course in statistics. It was all on a computer. The prof was there to help me. There were no lectures. But let's face it, the statistics lecture, by definition, is a bust, right? There's no one size fits all for statistics. Everyone in the room is either bored or they don't get it. I got an A, but so did most kids, up from a B- on the same set of standardized tests. It's just a better way of learning. I went through things at my pace. If I didn't understand something, I wasn't embarrassed to go over and over and over it again until I got it. If I did understand something, I went through it quickly. Oh, a decline in face-to-face communications. This is terrible. People staring into screens. Well, actually, no. There was more face-to-face communication because there was more one-on-one discussion. This is not about technology. It's about a change in the relationship between the student and the teacher and between students in the learning process. By the way, while I was at Virginia Tech, I went into this thing called the cave. 20 by 20 by 20, put on these artificial intelligence goggles, and your thing becomes a Luke Skywalker light sword, and you go into stuff. First thing I did is I walked around in this cathedral. It was beautiful. I walked around and would touch stuff and open up things and so on. Amazing. It was like I was in a cathedral. Oh, did I mention? This was destroyed by fire 400 years ago in France. Wow, is that ever different than looking at a picture of a cathedral in a book? Now, you want to maybe read about the cathedral too, for sure. But there are new models of learning emerging. This is from 2 months ago. I was in Portugal. Every kid in Portugal is getting a laptop. These are 7-year-olds. They're all connected to wireless networks, and the model of pedagogy is changing. The teacher stands up the front. She says, okay, class, everybody go to the astronomy blog. And all these kids are all turned on. They go to their astronomy. She says, what's an equinox? Anybody know? Nobody knows. They're 7-year-olds. So she says, okay, you know the deal. Find out what an equinox is. You can work one-on-one or in groups or anyway. So the kids are huddling, and one's onto Google and another's into Wikipedia, and there's a little discussion that's happening over here. These kids put up their hand. We know. We figured it out. They explain it to the class. The class asks them questions. These kids are turned on to learning. They're turned on to astronomy, and they're being equipped for the way that work and that life occurs in a knowledge and in a networked economy. So let me close with a final story. I was doing a talk to about 150 presidents of universities. This is in the US. And I went through this whole thing, as I just did for you. And it was a dinner speech that always worries me because there are projectiles on the table. But I sat down afterwards at my table. I got this pleasant applause, and I sat down. And I said to these people, so what'd you think? And they said, well, we buy it. I said, why is this taking so long? And one president says, well, I think the problem is money. We just don't have the money to reinvent the university. Another says, I think the problem is teaching traditions that go back centuries. Another says, I think the problem is the faculty. Average age 57 years old. They're all tenured, and they're sort of teaching in this post-Gutenberg style. And sitting beside me is the president of a little liberal arts university called Butler University. His name is Jeffrey Bannister, and he says, well, I don't think it's post-Gutenberg, not at my university, at Butler. It's pre-Gutenberg. You got a prof writing on a blackboard with handwritten notes. The students are all writing it down. He says the assumption of the printing press is not even a fundamental part of the learning paradigm. He says, wait till these kids who are surfing the web come into the universities. Now, that was a number of years ago. They're there now, and this is a powerful force for change. Excuse me, Mr. Professor, rather than notes, why don't we just, our lectures, why don't we just read your notes and we'll have small group discussions? And, you know, we'd love for you to be involved in those because we think you have good ideas. You know, excuse me, Mr. Professor, rather than reading lists where we're photocopying and all this, why don't we just have hot links so we can focus on learning? You know, there are 2 million families in the United States that have their kids in homeschooling. And I think the reason it's not 10 million is that parents aren't confident they could be good teachers. Imagine if you can have Jacques Cousteau in your house teaching your kid about marine biology. You know, he's pointing to real fish going by the screen and stuff. Now, I know he's dead, but you know what I'm talking about. It's a real-time animation of Jacques Cousteau. If we don't reinvent learning and education for the 21st century, then someone else is going to do this. One final word to teachers. I was at a cocktail party. This is 10 years ago in Toronto. And a woman came up to me, and she was teaching at Branksome College. And she said, I just wanted to know that you changed my life. And I said, how so? And she says, well, I am a math teacher at Branksome, and I read your book, and I heard you give a talk, and I've decided to do this. I've got rid of all lectures. I have interactive learning programs for math. She says, the kids love it. They're doing better on math. They love to come to class. I know more about every one of those kids after a month than I used to know after a year, and I'm a new woman. I can hardly wait to come to school in the morning. You know, wow, what an opportunity if you're a teacher. You get to reinvent your knowledge base and to become a new woman or a new man. don't fear this. Embrace it, because that's what's next. This is the future. And to me, the future is not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. Saint-Exupéry, pilot from the Second World War, he says, "We should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past, but we should respect the past, for it was once all that was humanly possible." This old model is all that was possible, but it's now possible to go forward. And Victor Hugo says there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And the time has come for us to reinvent education. And thankfully, we have a new generation that is going to make it happen. Thanks so much.